The Apostolic Fathers are a collection of the earliest writings of the Church outside of the New Testament. The writings of them vary wildly. We have letters in the style of the epistles of Paul, and others that are in the style more like Romans. You have others yet that are even more different, like the Shepherd of Hermas, which is a wide variety of parable stories to teach and instruct. And there's many other things in them. And there's something that's extremely interesting for those who are interested in the development of the early church and their teachings. One of your first questions might be, well, if these documents were so early, then why don't we have them in our New Testament? Why don't we use any of them? Well, there's a couple different answers to that question. And there are three things that we have to consider. The first of which is the earliness. We want to look at the earliness of these writings to see how close they are to the apostles. That's very closely tied into the next reason. We want to make sure that they have direct connection to the apostolic authority and the apostolic teaching and those who were in the presence of Jesus, right? So in the New Testament currently, most of the letters were and other books were written by Paul, right, who was in direct contact with many of the apostles who encountered Jesus on the road to Damascus. And you also have the Gospels, which are written by those who were either in the presence of Jesus, or direct accounts of those who saw these things, or by his very disciples and their recounting of the stories. The last main reason is universal acceptance, and this is where pretty much all of them fall off of the list here. Universal acceptance is how widespread of use they had in the church, and this is affected by the first two categories, right? If something's not written by the apostles or is tied to their authority, then it's not going to be widely accepted in the church. Also earliness. The earlier something is, the more time it has to become widespread. Because of these reasons, it's no surprise that First Clement garnered the most traction, with it being potentially the earliest of all of the documents, with the Didache potentially eking it out a little bit. But it was widespread enough that there were several churches that used it, and Eusebius makes mention of this. So let's take a quick review of these three main categories I'm setting before us. We have agreement and authority. This is it connected to the apostles, and is it in agreement with their teachings and the teachings of the Old Testament? This is where writings like the Gnostic writings that are also pretty early fall short. Earliness. Is it early enough to be directly connected to these people as well, to the apostles, and is it not after some other developments have happened in the church? And then last, universality, and this is where we'll see that most will fall off. Is it widely accepted in the Christian community? With that laid down, let's look at each individual book here. And for the sake of brevity, I have included all the letters of Ignatius as one cohesive group, given that they were all written in a very short period of time. So, we see in agreement and authority, we have First Clement, letters of Ignatius, Polycarp, and the Didache. Now, there's some things to note here. First Clement, it's debated whether this is the Clement that Paul met. If it is, then this is very closely tied to him and can be given to have this authority. However, it's attributed to Clement. It's not actually introduced by him, and so it's still up for debate, and most people would say it's not. However, there's the possibility. Letters of Ignatius. This one's very interesting because there's an interpretation of his writings where he potentially refers to Polycarp as his fellow disciple, potentially implying that, like Polycarp, Ignatius was a disciple of John. This is also up for debate. Most of the things here are debatable, given that we don't know as much about these as we do about the other New Testament writings, because they were gone for so long. We didn't find them again until a few hundred years ago. From Polycarp to the Philippians, if it holds true that Polycarp was John's disciple, then he is a very reliable early source and would have been someone who was very, very closely connected to one of the people who was directly involved with Jesus. There's some debate on whether this is the truth or not, though, because he does not seem to reference anything that John wrote in his gospel. The Didache is also very convoluted in its history. We're not sure exactly how it came to be, if it's connected to the apostles, but traditionally it is. But because this is totally unverifiable, this is speculation again. I've already briefly discussed earliness, with First Clement and the Didache being the only two that were very likely compiled or written before the end of the century, before the year 100 AD. The letters of Ignatius are very close, being compiled around 100 AD, just after, but First Clement is certainly contemporary with the book of Revelation, having been written right around 90 AD, when most scholars agree that the book of Revelation was written. When it comes to universality, we see all of them fall off, although we do know that many of them were in circulation in different communities of Christians around the area. It just is not the case that they were widespread enough to be accepted as scripture. And when combined with these other factors, we see why they could not be accepted, because there was many things going around, many writings attributed to so many people. And so in order to make a coherent grouping of scriptures for Christians, certain things had to be excluded. Now that does not mean that they're not beneficial to read at all. In fact, I have found many of them to be very edifying and very interesting. Before I go on with my own personal remarks, though, I want to note one interesting thing, and that is about the book of Hebrews. Now, the book of Hebrews, it fits earliness and universality, however, we have no idea where it comes from. Many people will say Paul, but we cannot prove that, and it does not seem to be in line with the rest of Paul's letters. So that's one that actually does not quite fit all of these. However, we accept it because the early Christians saw that it was good, and they received it as scripture. So how ought we read these? How ought we receive these writings that the early church obviously used in some capacity, but did not give their seal of approval to? They are certainly beneficial to read. They contain so much truth and, for the most part, are in line with the teachings of the apostles and what we see in the New Testament scriptures. They also give us incredible insight into how the early church was thinking and how they were developing. But if at any point we come across something that does not agree with Scripture, we should not accept that. Second Clement, for example, seems to contain some early Gnostic influence, and as such we should hold it with some suspicion. However, it is beneficial to see how the church was developing. It can be spiritually edifying, certainly. In my reading of First Clement, I thought it was amazing. All the letters of Ignatius, amazing. The Epistle of Polycarp, amazing. All of them rich readings that give us so much insight and spiritual wisdom, but not to be put on the same level as Scripture. And we should trust the early church in their judgments of these things. If you're interested in reading the Apostolic Fathers for yourself, I highly recommend Michael W. Holmes's edition. It includes the full translation in English, as well as an introduction to each book, which includes notes about authorship, timelines, and the main issues that each book addresses. Please check out the link in the description to order it for yourself, and if you enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing for more videos like this.